Hello everyone. Tonight, we will step into the cold, dimly lit corridors of an ancient English palace. But not for a tour. There are no guides, no tickets. We'll quietly follow behind the Virgin Queen Elizabeth I in the final days of her life, when even her own reflection became the velvet-draped face of death. This is a story tinged with poisonous rouge and lying mirrors. Sounds like a bedtime tale, doesn't it? Well, if you can actually fall asleep to this, I salute you. Before you get too comfortable, take a few seconds to like the video and subscribe to the channel. But only if you truly feel what I'm doing here is worth listening to. And by the way, leave a comment to let me know where you're tuning in from, which city and what time it is. I'd love to know who I'm lulling to sleep and in which time zone. Now dim the lights, let the fan whisper gently by your ear, and together, let's drift quietly into tonight's journey. You are standing in a room silent as the grave deep within Richmond Palace, England. There are no footsteps, only the flickering light of dying candles, casting shimmering shadows on walls draped in crimson velvet. It is a night in March 1603. So cold it seems even the bricks are exhaling frost. And at the center of that room is a dressing table. Not the tidy kind of IKEA desk you might find in a modern apartment. No, this is a small throne covered in vials, porcelain bowls, and silver beauty tools. Each item appears to belong to some arcane ritual, because in truth it was. Queen Elizabeth I, the woman who defeated the Spanish Empire and ruled England for nearly half a century, spent 4 hours a day, yes, 4 hours, reconstructing her face before appearing in public. This was not just beauty. This was performance, a form of power camouflage. Imagine it each morning before the sun fully rises. Elizabeth sits motionless like a wax figure. Her ladies-in-waiting, their hands trembling with fear of a single misstep, begin to apply layer upon layer of cosmetics to her skin. But this isn't ordinary powder, it's Venetian ceruse, a snow-white mixture of lead and vinegar. Expensive, fashionable, and toxic. At the time, a ghostly white complexion was the height of aristocratic status. Pale skin meant you didn't toil under the sun. But few spoke the truth. Each layer of that powder was slowly poisoning its wearer. Historians still debate how aware Elizabeth was of this. Some say she knew perfectly well, but felt powerless to stop. Much like us today, glued to our phones, even as we know they're draining our dopamine reserves. Strangely, among her attendants, there are accounts that by her final years, Elizabeth's real face had nearly vanished. Her skin had become rough, blotchy, like wax paper. Her hair fell out in clumps, and some areas reportedly gave off a metallic smell. Yet despite everything, she still demanded to be painted. Why? Because a queen could not appear without her face. It wasn't vanity, it was statecraft. Perhaps the strangest element of all was the mirror. Seemingly simple, yet in Elizabeth's palace, not all mirrors were allowed. According to accounts from the end of her reign, the queen had all real mirrors replaced with curved or silver-dulled one, crafted to reflect a softer, more flattering image, always showing her a gentler version of herself. In other words, she built a distorted world of reflections in order to bear reality. Sound familiar? Like Instagram filters, only hers were made of silver and funded by the royal treasury. Now, if you're thinking, well, Elizabeth must have been the only one so obsessed with toxic makeup. Sorry to disappoint, lead-based cosmetics were all the rage back then. Many noble women died from it. They just weren't as famous. But Elizabeth took it to the extreme. No one else turned makeup into a political symbol the way she did. Here's a lesser-known detail. In 1562, at just 29, Elizabeth contracted smallpox. She survived, but it left deep pockmarks, especially on her cheeks and forehead. From then on, her makeup wasn't just a diplomatic tool, it was a mask hiding a very personal wound. Historians still debate the psychological impact of this event. Some believe the illness marked a turning point, prompting Elizabeth to turn beauty into her personal religion. Others argue it was just one thread in a life already woven with trauma. From her mother Anne Boleyn being beheaded when she was only 2 to a childhood spent amid conspiracies and death threats. Either way, imagine surviving smallpox, living with scars for life, and being expected to appear each day like a goddess, no wrinkles, no blemishes, not a single moment of weakness. It's no wonder she chose the mask over the truth. And hey, if you've ever spent 20 minutes editing a selfie, don't be too quick to judge. It's said that in her final years, Elizabeth became increasingly eccentric. She wouldn't let anyone near her, insisted on meeting in dimly lit rooms. At one point, according to the Venetian ambassador, she spoke to empty chairs, calling out to her mother as if she were still alive. Perhaps it was age, or perhaps it was chronic lead poisoning, something modern medicine confirms can affect memory, mood, and cognition. It's the story of a queen, but also the tragedy of a woman who was never allowed to grow old. You know there's a pattern that repeats throughout history when someone in power begins to weaken the smiles around them, grow sharper. Elizabeth was no exception. And in her final chapter, as her body collapsed under the weight of cosmetic toxins, the whispers around her began to shift. Among those closest to her, there were quite a few who didn't want her to abandon the deadly mask. Not just for vanity's sake, but because as long as she was beautiful, the monarchy seemed stable. A wrinkle-free queen meant a crack-free crown. So if you were an ambitious courtier and you knew her powder could scramble her memory, make her hands tremble, cloud her political judgment, what would you do? Would you tell her to stop? Or would you say, "Your Majesty, you look radiant today. Perhaps just one more layer and it will be perfect." There are records showing that William Cecil Elizabeth's most loyal and seasoned advisor repeatedly warned her about the dangers of lead-based cosmetics. He urged moderation, suggested more natural alternatives. But unfortunately, those warnings were drowned out by sweeter voices, ladies-in-waiting court physicians, even cosmetic artisans, all of whom relied on the royal face for their livelihood. Some modern historians suggest she was killed slowly, not by daggers, not by poison in her wine, but by compliments whispered each morning. Sounds like a political thriller, doesn't it? But think again, a mentally declining, queen increasingly easy to manipulate, yet still holding the throne because of her divine appearance. It was the perfect condition for others to rule in her name. Historians continue to debate this. Was it truly a calculated poisoning by the court, or merely the byproduct of beauty worship? Some argue there was no clear conspiracy, that those around her were simply complicit in denial. They saw her self-destruction, but stayed silent for their own gain. And sometimes silence is crueler than treason. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Maybe you've seen a friend burning out from trying to be perfect, and instead of telling them to rest, you said, "You're doing amazing, just push a little more." Sometimes betrayal is just encouragement, said at the wrong moment. Back to Elizabethan around 1602, signs of acute lead poisoning were undeniable memory lapses, delusions, tremors, skin lesions. But instead of cutting back, she asked for more. Her ladies spent hours plastering her face. By then the makeup was so thick it cracked when she smiled. A simulated smile frozen like wax. A strange note from a French ambassador recounts. "When I was granted audience, the Queen's face did not move. It was as though I was speaking to a breathing portrait." And you know what's even stranger? One time in a panic, Elizabeth reportedly said, "They are painting me into the grave." A vague statement, seemingly hinting at those thick layers of powder. A subconscious suspicion that she was being manipulated through her own image. Some modern scholars, especially feminist analysts, have asked, was there no need to kill Elizabeth because the pressure to be beautiful had already done it? You see, Elizabeth's death wasn't just chemical destruction. It was self-destruction, cheered on by an entire power structure, a performance where the audience knew the ending, but kept clapping anyway. And at the center of it all was a woman lonely, exhausted, and imprisoned within the false skin she once took pride in. One late winter night in 1603, wind tore through the heavy velvet drapes at Richmond Palace. Outside, the Thames was so cold, its surface seemed frozen, as if it too were holding its breath. Inside, on a gold-leaf bed carved with Tudor roses, Elizabeth Thrush was slowly dissolving. There was no noise, no bloody tragedy, no weeping cries. Her death, like her life, was a symphony of meticulously controlled silence. By this point, the Queen could no longer paint her face each morning. Her hands trembled too much to hold a small mirror, let alone a brush. That task now belonged to her ladies-in-waiting, the same women who just years earlier had bowed before her ageless beauty, now leaned in to layer thick soothe onto ruined skin. Her skin, if it could still be called skin, resembled wet paper after a rain-thin gray peeling at the edges. Amid this unraveling, Elizabeth began to do something strange, she wrote. Not diplomatic letters, not royal decrees, but something else, handwritten notes private in silence during the night. Only one person was allowed in her chamber at such times, Catherine Carey, her most trusted lady-in-waiting, almost a blood relative. It was Catherine who later recounted that Elizabeth wrote during rare lucid moments, her hand trembling so badly that her script looked as though the wind had carried it. What did the letters say? No one knows for certain. But on one occasion, Catherine revealed a few lines to a later chronicler. Elizabeth wrote that she had chosen this death-slow, deliberate layer by layer. That she knew the white powder was killing her, knew the mercury in her lipstick made her teeth fall out. Her skin turn blue, her heartbeat go erratic. But if given a choice between cruel truth and the image of power, she chose power. One line that chills many, I am a painted ghost free in the performance imprisoned in the truth. It sounds as if she were critiquing herself in a play. And in a way, she was. Her reign had always been a vast stage where every glance, every appearance was exquisitely directed. Only now, in the final act, no one could direct the body that was falling apart. A little-known detail, Elizabeth refused to lie in bed for days before her death. She stood leaning against a wall, drifting like a phantom, not eating, not speaking, only murmuring to herself or staring into nothing. One day, Catherine found her talking to a mirror. But the mirror reflected nothing. It was a dull sheet of silver, so tarnished you couldn't even see yourself in it. Historians still debate. Were these strange behaviors the result of lead poisoning or a spiritual collapse after nearly 50 years of being a queen forbidden to show weakness? Either way, in her final hours, Elizabeth no longer recognized anyone except Catherine. As for herself, perhaps she no longer knew who the figure in the mirror was. Think this is the saddest part. Hold on a moment. There's a legend mentioned by some 19th century historians, then later silenced. They claim that when Elizabeth died, a letter was found hidden in the lining of her cloak, the handwriting nearly absorbed into the fabric. And in it, she not only confessed to poisoning herself, but hinted that someone had guided me step by step to the grave. She wrote vaguely naming no one, but used the word they as if it wasn't one person, but an entire system. A court, a mirror, a role, a public image she could not refuse. A little joke if you'd like. Here you go. If Elizabeth were alive today, she'd probably sue the cosmetics company for side effects not listed on the label. She might even have become an influencer. Each morning I use lead-based porcelain powder gives that super ethereal marble effect. When Elizabeth drew her last breath on the morning of March 24th, 1603, they say no one dared come near. The room was ice cold, but not from the weather, it was fear. Fear of the truth peeling off with the final layer of powder. And when that last layer of soothe was wiped away, the attendants stood still, breathless. They no longer saw a queen. They saw a woman old, all collapsing under her own weight. If you ever thought a princess's childhood meant white horses, flowing gowns, and garden tea parties, tuck that image away. because Elizabeth Tudor's childhood was a story soaked in cold metal and political violence. You were born, the daughter of Henry VIII, king, so infamous that if he lived today, he'd have a podcast, a reality show, and probably a line of branded meat cleavers. People remember Henry not just for his power, but because he beheaded two of his wives, one of them being Elizabeth's mother, Anne Boleyn. You are Elizabeth. At just 2 years old, you watch from a distance as your mother is accused of adultery, incest, and witchcraft. Yes, the perfect combination for erasing a powerful woman at the time. On May 19th, 1536, your mother is beheaded with a French sword specially ordered because an axe would look too crude. And from that moment on, you, Elizabeth, go from princess to bastard child. Your place in the royal household becomes like a piece of furniture, useful but dispensable. A detail few notice: Henry VIII ordered Elizabeth's name removed from the line of succession. She still lived in the palace, still wore silk, but no one dared call her princess anymore. Just Lady Elizabeth. A demotion by grammar. You grew up in the shadow of a guilt you never caused. Historians still debate, did the trauma of losing her mother forge the armored queen to come? Some believe Elizabeth learned early on not to trust anyone. Others say it was simply survival. Anyone who lasted in the Tudor court had to. Like playing chess where every pawn might be hiding a dagger. As you got older, you were taught everything Latin, Greek, French, Italian. Not to become someone's wife, but to survive. Because you knew that if you weren't smarter than the people around you, you'd be the next target. There's an event that shocks many. When Elizabeth was 8, her father married for the 6th time to Catherine Parr. And strangely, Catherine was the first person in Elizabeth's life to teach her to read the Bible in English. From there, Elizabeth began shaping her own faith, not Catholic, not fully Anglican, but something independent, just like she would later become. A belief to keep her sane in a sea of deceit. Imagine a child who had lost her mother to the executioner's sword, had her title stripped by her father, yet still had to sit up straight, reciting Homer in the morning and reading Machiavelli letters by afternoon. Yes, that was Elizabeth. Not a child. A living political project. And another strange detail throughout her childhood, she never called her father father. Only His Majesty or the King. As if saying it wrong might cost her her head. Did she have friends? She did. But you reach a certain age when you realize that in a royal court, friends aren't for playing, they're for knowing who's talking about you the moment you turn your back. A soft little joke: if Elizabeth had Facebook back then, her friend list would probably be full of people she quietly unfollowed. And you know what's even more terrifying? Despite growing up among executions and divorces, despite learning to live with a frozen face, Elizabeth held on to something no one expected: the ability to forgive. When she later ascended the throne, she did not take revenge on those who had called her a bastard. Maybe it was because she was too smart. Or maybe she had learned that true power doesn't lie in revenge, but in making your enemies stand before you with bowed heads. You are 14 years old, just emerging from the swamp of a childhood filled with blades and bitter letters. Now you live in the home of your stepmother, Catherine Parr. Surprisingly, this becomes one of the rare times in your life when you almost feel like a normal young girl. Of course, normal here means waking up every morning to study ancient Greek writing calligraphy in iron gall ink and remembering to smile politely when guests come for tea. But within those royal boundaries, you feel safer until Thomas Seymour appears. You know Thomas, the younger brother of Edward Seymour, Lord Protector for King Edward VI. Handsome, charming, with a smile that says, I know I am beautiful. He marries Catherine Parr, your stepmother and guardian. Sounds like the opening to an 18-plus palace drama. But yes, this is history. Thomas starts paying attention to you, Lady Elizabeth, 14, overly intelligent, yet still a girl growing into herself. At first, it's teasing playful jokes, then visits to your room early in the morning before you're fully dressed. Sometimes Catherine even joins in for fun, thinking it's harmless. Some records state that Thomas once woke you by cutting your nightgown with a small knife. Yes, cutting your nightgown with a knife, and you remained silent. Not because you liked it, but because you knew if you responded the wrong way, you would lose everything. Historians still debate, was Elizabeth truly harassed, or was the relationship a murky first love? Some say she was a victim. Others argue she learned from it the art of silence and manipulation. Personally, you could have been both. The situation grew so tense that Catherine, par pregnant, at the time sent Elizabeth away. No public accusations, just a one-way ticket back to Lady Elizabeth, safely distant from scandal. A lesser-known fact shortly after Catherine died in childbirth, and Thomas began plotting to marry Elizabeth. Yes, the unofficial stepfather wanted to become a royal consort. But you, Elizabeth, now 15 and wiser than anyone, quietly cut off all contact. Thomas was later arrested for treason and executed. During the investigation, you were summoned for questioning multiple times. They tried to extract evidence, tried to make you slip. But you said nothing wrong. You didn't cry, didn't rage, didn't fall apart. You escaped. And from that point on, a guiding principle was born. I will never belong to any man. You chose not to marry, not because you lacked suitors. In fact, if there had been a royal Tinder, you'd probably have had to turn off notifications from being overwhelmed. You were proposed to by King Philip II of Spain, the Duke of Anjou from France, more than 20 years younger, fond of dancing, and many domestic figures who wanted a marriage to stabilize the crown. But you turned them all down, always with a diplomatic excuse, I am still considering, or that is far in the future. But what was the truth? You knew that marrying anyone would instantly strip away the image you could no longer control an independent queen unbound by any man. And in a world where power was often equated with beards and wedding rings, remaining unmarried became a survival strategy. Some scholars believe it was childhood trauma. Others say you simply hated being tied down. But perhaps you chose not to marry, because you understood one thing: to be someone's wife was to be someone's shadow. And you, Elizabeth, were born to stand in the light. A little joke, if permitted, you may not have taken a husband, but you had an entire kingdom calling you my queen. And truthfully, that's far more satisfying. You are 25. The winter sun slants through the stone windows of Hatfield Palace. On the table, an open Scrollet's red seal from the Privy Council, now broken. And the message inside causes you only to blink once. Queen Mary has died. You are now the Queen of England. You don't scream, you don't leap, you don't collapse like screenwriters like to imagine. You simply gaze toward the window where light filters through the fog and whisper in Latin, "This is the Lord's doing. It is marvelous in our eyes." At that very moment, according to one servant, a great wind rose so fierce, it uprooted a tree outside. Many saw it as an omen. But to you, Elizabeth, the wind carried no prophecy. It merely reminded you from this moment on, every step you take will be a step through a storm. Because you inherited a fractured kingdom. Your sister Mary, known as Bloody Mary, had left behind a nation exhausted by religious persecution. Over 280 people were burned alive for heresy during her 5-year reign. The smoke of those executions still clung to the streets of London, and now you were the successor, not just to the throne, but to the fear. So what did you do? You did the unexpected. Instead of fanning the flames of religious war, you introduced a new law, freedom of belief, so long as you don't burn churches or rebel. The Catholic nobility was suspicious. The Protestants were distrustful. But you, with terrifying precision in your words, made both sides believe you were on theirs. Though in truth, you stood on your own. A lesser-known fact in your first meetings with the council. You ordered that all members address you as Majesty, not Lady or Princess. One word, but it shifted the power balance in the room. Some people scoffed, but only once. Because you, Elizabeth, remembered every mocking glance from your childhood, and now every one of those eyes bowed before the crown you wore with hair as red as fire. Historians still debate, did Elizabeth truly have a master plan from the beginning? Or was she simply a brilliant reactor to crisis? Some say she was lucky, right place, right time. Others argue there is no such thing as 45 years of luck on the throne. Regardless, the truth stands tall. Within the first 6 months, you had stabilized the religious policy, quelled internal civil unrest, and most importantly, rejected all political marriage proposals. Yes, you were young. You had every right to forge a marital alliance with France, Spain, or any dynasty waving a wedding ring. But you chose to keep power to yourself. A light joke, if Netflix had existed back then, your show would have been titled The Girl Who Turned Down Every Proposal and Still Made a Continent Nervous. You crafted a new image for yourself, the Virgin Queen. Not because you wanted to advertise your marital status, but because, in that era, virginity meant you belonged to no one except your country. You turned it into a diplomatic weapon, to the point that foreign ambassadors wrote marriage proposals as if applying for a visa. You hadn't fought a single war, yet all of Europe grew uneasy. Because you knew when to stay silent, when to smile, and most importantly, when to say nothing at all. You enter your 40s, a time when, in that era, most women were already grandmothers, tucked away in chapels baking bread, reading scripture and awaiting the final chapter. And you ride horses across meadows at dawn, negotiate with ambassadors at noon, sign death warrants by afternoon, and by night, sit for hours to be painted into the light of the realm. No husband, no children, no heir, but all of England saw you as a great mother. They called you Gloriana Astrea, the goddess of justice. You were no longer a person. You were a symbol, and you knew it. You sculpted your image yourself. Every gesture, every glance calculated like a living stage production. But even goddesses get tested. And your greatest test came from the South Spain. King Philip VI. Your sister's former husband could not bear a Protestant England led by a single woman. To him, it was an offense to both religion and testosterone. Philip sent a gift with a short fuse, the Armada, the largest Spanish naval fleet ever deployed in Europe. This was the defining year. Whoever won would define an entire era. You, Elizabeth, could not fight in the battle, but you appeared at Tilbury before thousands of soldiers clad in armor, riding a white horse, red hair flowing, and delivered a line that would echo through history. I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England, too. You may not have known how to wield a sword, but you knew how to wield words. That sentence didn't just rally soldiers, it made them weep. Some were ready to die then and there simply because you had turned their very existence into glory. A lesser-known fact, right before the battle, your council urged you to retreat to safety. They feared you'd be assassinated, and you replied with a raised brow as if the suggestion bored you. Historians still debate, did Elizabeth truly believe in that speech, or was it masterful image strategy? Some say she meant every word. Others believe it was peak PR, before PR was even a concept. Either way, the outcome was clear. The Armada was utterly destroyed, partly due to England's naval tactics, partly thanks to the weather. Storms rolled in, scattering the Spanish fleet like a box of Lego on the sea. People called it the wind of God. And you, tilting your head, smiled, as if the wind itself knew which side should win. A soft joke if Elizabeth lived today. Her post-battle caption might have been, "Sometimes you don't need a man, just the right storm." After that victory, England changed. And so did you. You began to control everything more tightly. Letters, rumors, even paintings. Yes, you issued an order that no portrait should depict signs of aging or fatigue. All official images were to show you young, pale, and flawless, like a goddess. Some historians call it aesthetic tyranny. But you knew one wrinkle on your face could be a crack in the crown. Strangely enough, those portraits became enduring symbols of England. Even into the 21st century, people still use the image of Elizabeth, with a porcelain white face, high collar, and wide gown, as an emblem of a golden age. You somehow not only rewrote the role of women in politics, but also redefined the very idea of beauty. You are now over 60. Nothing unusual by today's standards. But in the 16th century, it was a medical miracle. And like all miracles, the price was high. Your hands tremble every morning. The legs that once strode across royal fields now rely on wooden walls for support. But you show no one. To the court, you are still Elizabeth, radiant, immortal, and terrifying as a distant star. But in your private chambers, where only you see your true face, you know the white powder is no longer makeup, it is cement holding together a form that's beginning to shatter. And on the quietest nights you write. Not diplomatic letters, but confessions, chaotic, conflicted, despairing. You write with a shaking hand in script so crooked that later readers would need magnifying glasses to decipher it. You call these writings testamentum pulchritudinist, the testament of beauty. A strange phrase, isn't it? Because instead of leaving a throne, you leave behind the reason you chose to destroy yourself piece by piece. In that letter, legend says it was hidden in the lining of your cloak. You confess, I know the white powder kills me. I know my lipstick carries blood. But I am afraid that if I am no longer beautiful, I am no longer anyone at all. You no longer believe in mirrors. The mirrors in your chambers are replaced with foggy glass or removed entirely. Some are swapped for convex mirrors, so your face always appears smooth and round, without lines. A little-known fact, those mirrors were imported from Venice, specially shaped for the Queen alone. Just like an Instagram filter set to smooth skin +5. In one passage you write, I am queen of a kingdom, but slave to a face that died 30 years ago. Modern historians still debate the existence of this letter. Some say it's purely myth embroidered over time. Others, citing the testimony of your attendant, Catherine Carey, believe the letter was destroyed by King James III because it was too dangerous. It revealed that Gloriana, the untouchable icon, was in truth a broken woman. And then the moment came when you fell. No noise, no blood. No Shakespearean tragedy could describe it. You refused to lie in bed. For days you stood motionless, leaning against the wall. Not eating, not drinking, not sleeping. You simply existed. Like a ghost waiting to be called one last time. Attendants recalled that your eyes stayed wide open through the night, staring into nothingness as if waiting for someone. Some said you saw your mother, Anne Boleyn, return to you. Others said you spoke to your own reflection in the mirror, asking, am I still beautiful enough to be loved? And a soft joke, if you're still awake, that's when someone should have turned off the beauty filter. But sadly, there was no off button back then. On the day you took your final breath, March 24th, 1603 light rain fell. All of England sank into silence. When your ladies-in-waiting wiped away the last layer of powder from your face, they did not cry for the loss of a queen, but because for the first time they saw a person again. The skin beneath the crumbling, Sousa greenish-gray, paper-thin, ulcerated in places. The red hair had fallen out in patches. Teeth blackened like charred wood from mercury. And they suddenly understood Gloriana had not died in one night. She had died day by day, layer by layer, with every application of makeup. You were gone. But the rain did not die with you. Just hours after Elizabeth I took her last breath in the cold chamber of Richmond Palace, a party on horseback rode north, carrying a message written briefly in cipher. The sun has set. Prepare the moon. The recipient was James Stuart King, James VI of Scotland, grandson of Mary Stuart, your cousin, and once your enemy. Now James was the chosen heir to the English throne, uniting two kingdoms. You childless, husbandless, with no direct successor, had chosen as your heir the son of the woman you once had executed. History at times enjoys playing cruel loops. James entered London a few weeks later, dressed in mourning black with a piece of black cloth embroidered with a silver E on his chest. But behind that symbolic grief, he had a clear goal to erase anything that might tarnish your image. Because you, Elizabeth, were not just a monarch. You were a national symbol. And James knew if that symbol crumbled, the legitimacy of his new reign would be shaken. And so the cleansing began. Your medical record sealed. No mention of lead poisoning, no mercurial delusions, nothing but the sterile phrase, died of old age. The handwritten letter you titled Testamentum Pulchritudinis, the Testament of Beauty, was discovered by one of the last attendants at your side. According to legend, she intended to keep it. But James' men arrived too soon. The letter was confiscated. No one read it publicly, no one copied it, no one preserved it. There are rumors that it was taken to the dark room of Whitehall Palace, the place where documents deemed too true to acknowledge were stored. And from there, the personal tragedy of a woman was removed from the public record. The historical event here is James ascended the throne in 1603 and immediately began reforming the administrative apparatus, including the censorship of Elizabeth's legacy. He didn't want the public to remember her late-life seizures or the fogged mirrors she stuck around her bedroom. He wanted them to remember an immortal goddess who never aged, never erred, never human. The strange story is James ordered the destruction of all records related to imported cosmetic components from Venice. Certain trade documents vanished overnight. The names of suppliers were erased from registries. People even stopped mentioning the word ceruse white lead powder in any official documents, as if the substance that clung to Elizabeth's skin for 40 years had never existed. Modern historians still debate, did James I erase the truth to protect Elizabeth's reputation, or to use her image as a mirror in which he could reflect his own reign? Whatever the reason, the outcome was the same. A queen who had suffered from being turned into a symbol was fossilized further after death. Do you know what the saddest part is? After you died, your final official portrait, the rainbow portrait, was painted at the request of the new court. In it, you have no wrinkles, your gaze is fierce, you hold a rainbow in your hand, your face is round like a goddess. A light joke if you see that painting and don't spot a single crow's foot. Don't worry, it's not a Photoshop fail. They just erased it too well. The consequences of this silence lasted for centuries. Generations of women after Elizabeth had no warning about the toxicity of cosmetics. The ladies of the Stuart era continued to use lead powder and mercury lip paint because they didn't know the Queen had died from those very things. The truth was buried too well. Not until the 20th century, when historians dug up scattered personal notes, ladies-in-waiting letters, and hidden medical reports in Scottish archives, did the fuller picture emerge. A queen poisoned, not by enemies, but by the pressure to be a symbol. A woman trapped between power and beauty, forced to choose both, even knowing neither lasts forever. And do you know what the final strange detail is? In a margin note, an old servant, the one who wiped her face every night, wrote, "I think she knew. She knew very well the cosmetics were killing her. But she said, to be beautiful for one more day is to reign for one more day." When Elizabeth took her final breath on the morning of March 24th, 1603, England didn't just lose a monarch, it lost the last woman of the House of Tudor. Her coffin, draped in purple velvet pulled by 4 gray horses in black coverings, rolled silently from Whitehall to Westminster Abbey. On the lid lay a life-sized wax effigy of Elizabeth, dressed in her parliamentary robes, wearing the crown, holding the scepter so lifelike that many gasped in astonishment. The funeral procession stretched like a black river, led by the poor, dressed in black cloaks, followed by musicians, knights, nobles, and the ladies of the court. At the front was Helena Snackenborg, the Marchioness of Northampton, serving as the chief mourner. Everywhere sighs and sobs echoed like a mournful symphony. Chronicler John Stowe recorded, "Westminster was filled with people of all sorts, from streets, rooftops, windows to gutters, all gathered to witness the funeral. There was such a general sighing, groaning, and weeping, as the like hath not been seen or known in the memory of man." After the ceremony at Westminster Abbey, Elizabeth's coffin was interred in the vault of her grandparents, King Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. However, in 1606, by order of King James I, her coffin was moved to the Henry VII Chapel, where she was buried alongside her half-sister, Queen Mary I. The Latin inscription on their tomb reads, "Regno consortes and urna hic obdormimus, Elisabetha et Maria, sorores, in spe resurrectionis, consorts in realm and tomb. Here we sleep, Elizabeth and Mary sisters, in hope of resurrection." A lesser-known detail. While Elizabeth's body was lying in state at Whitehall, a strange incident occurred. According to Elizabeth Southwell, a court maid, Elizabeth's body exploded inside the lead coffin due to gas buildup from decomposition. This event reminded many of her father, King Henry VIII, who reportedly suffered a similar post-mortem condition. However, historians still debate the authenticity of this account, especially since Southwell later converted to Catholicism and was deemed an unreliable source. Another notable point, King James I, Elizabeth's successor, did not attend her funeral. Instead, he spent $11,000, a staggering sum at the time, on an extravagant funeral and the construction of a white marble monument in her honor. Nonetheless, James's absence from the funeral of his predecessor remains a subject of historical debate. Elizabeth's funeral was not merely a royal farewell, but the definitive end of the Tudor dynasty and the beginning of the Stuart era. The people mourned not only the passing of a queen, but the loss of a symbol of stability, a woman who had held the throne for nearly half a century of turbulence. And as a final farewell, Elizabeth's family and courtiers broke their white staffs of office and cast them into her grave, a ritual, symbolizing the end of their service and loyalty to the departed queen. After Queen Elizabeth I died on March 24, 1603, her body was transported from Richmond Palace to Whitehall Palace by barge on the River Thames. There it was placed in a lead-lined wooden coffin, draped in purple velvet, awaiting the formal funeral. For 3 weeks, the body was vigilantly guarded, with 6 noble ladies taking turns to watch over her at night. A life-sized wax effigy of the Queen, dressed in parliamentary robes, crowned and holding the scepter, was placed atop the coffin. Oh, lifelike that many were stunned in awe. On April 28, 1603, the official funeral of Queen Elizabeth I took place with a long and solemn procession from Whitehall to Westminster Abbey. The procession began with 266 poor women walking 4 abreast, followed by musicians, knights, nobles, and ladies of the court, all dressed in black. Leading the procession was Helena Snackenborg, Marchioness of Northampton, in the role of chief mourner. The coffin, pulled by 4 gray horses draped in black, rolled silently along the road from Whitehall to Westminster Abbey. Atop the coffin rested a wax effigy of Elizabeth so lifelike that many gasped in astonishment. A canopy above the coffin was carried by 6 earls, while royal symbols such as dragons, lions, and greyhounds were borne by knights. All around, sighs and sobs echoed like a mournful symphony. Chronicler John Stowe recorded, "Westminster was filled with people of all sorts, from streets, rooftops, windows to gutters, all gathered to witness the funeral. There was such a general sighing, groaning, and weeping as the like hath not been seen or known in the memory of man." After the service at Westminster Abbey, Elizabeth's coffin was interred in the vault of her grandparents, King Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. However, in 1606, by order of King James I, her coffin was moved to the Henry VII Chapel, where she was buried alongside her half-sister Queen Mary I. The Latin inscription on the tomb reads, Regno consorts in urna hic obdormimus, Elizabetha et Maria sororis, in spe resurrectionis consorts in realm and tomb, here we sleep Elizabeth and Mary sisters in hope of resurrection. A little-known detail. While Elizabeth's body lay in state at Whitehall, a strange incident occurred. According to Elizabeth Southwell, a maid of honor at court Elizabeth's body exploded inside the lead coffin due to a buildup of gas from decomposition. The event reminded many of her father, King Henry VIII, who reportedly experienced a similar post-mortem condition. However, historians continue to debate the credibility of this account, particularly as Southwell later converted to Catholicism and was considered unreliable. Another notable point, King James I, Elizabeth's successor, did not attend her funeral. Instead, he spent $11,000, a massive sum at the time, on an elaborate funeral and the construction of a white marble monument in her honor. Still, his absence from the funeral of his predecessor remains a controversial topic among historians. Elizabeth's funeral was not just a royal farewell, it marked the end of the Tudor dynasty and the beginning of the Stuart era. The people mourned not only the loss of a queen, but the loss of a symbol of stability. A woman who had held the throne through nearly half a century of upheaval. And as a final goodbye, Elizabeth's family and courtiers broke their white staffs of office and cast them into her grave, a ritual, symbolizing the end of their service and loyalty to the departed queen. Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, Gloriana, Good Queen, Bess, was gone, but her image would live on in the hearts of the English people and in world history. Before Elizabeth's reign, knowledge was a luxury. But Shea-learned woman fluent in 6 classical languages was not only a symbol of intellect, but an inspiration for an entire kingdom to learn. She patronized poets, playwrights, philosophers, and scholars. Under her reign, names like Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and Edmund Spenser flourished not by accident, but because she gave them soil to grow and sky to dream in. One historian once said, Elizabeth was not just Queen of England, she was Queen of the imagination. And if you ever sat in class wondering, why do we have to read Macbeth? Well, you might have her to thank for that. An empire turns to the seas, no longer a timid girl. Under Elizabeth's reign, England became a maritime power. No longer a fearful island gazing at Europe, England now raised its head to look out upon the world. With her support, explorers like Francis Drake, Walter Raleigh, and John Hawkins set sail to the Americas, Africa, and India. This very reign laid the groundwork for the future British Empire, the one upon which the sun never sets. And here's a touch of irony. Elizabeth never left England, yet she was the one who opened the doors for the entire world to enter. Stability in chaos, politics by mind, not by sword. Elizabeth was not the kind of ruler who ruled by bloodshed. She did not ride into battle, did not flaunt military might. Instead, she ruled with strategy, patience, and masterful performance. For over 4 decades, she avoided civil war, even though the country nearly fell apart from religious conflict. Survived assassination plots despite living in a blood-soaked age of endless conspiracies. Never married yet, held power as if she had wed the throne itself. One curious detail. Elizabeth received more than 20 marriage proposals from European princes and nobles, all declined with polite but slightly boastful words. Historians still debate, was her refusal to marry a strategy or a fear? Either way, the Virgin Queen remained a reigning brand for life. Defender of the faith and the price of balance. On religion, Elizabeth was not extreme, but extraordinarily wise. After succeeding her Catholic half-sister Mary, Elizabeth re-established the Church of England and skillfully balanced the forces of Catholicism and Protestantism. She didn't launch mass purges, but neither did she hesitate to strike if the throne was threatened. A prime example, the execution of Mary Queen of Scots, a decision still debated by historians. Some view it as political self-defense. Others see it as a moral blemish on her reign. Either way, that choice helped her keep the crown and England its peace. An immortal image and a lesson in personal branding from the 16th century. Elizabeth understood media before the concept existed. She ordered the control of official portraits, allowing only one style to depict her white face, regal robes, ageless expression. Not unlike a nationwide Instagram filter. The story of Elizabeth never aging in public became legend. She transformed into a sacred figure, not a real person, but a living symbol. And even in death, she left behind the image of a proud queen, unyielding and untouched by time. You are a woman living in England under Elizabeth I time, when beauty standards were not merely personal dreams, but a soft weapon, a silent calling card, and sometimes the only way to be heard. Beauty in your era was not about seduction. Beauty meant survival. And survival meant learning to look into the mirror each morning holding in your hands substances that, if placed in a modern lab, would be labeled hazardous, then applying them to your face, with the belief that a whiter complexion today might make life a little easier tomorrow. White skin. That was where everything began. In Elizabethan times, beauty was not natural. It was constructed layer by layer. The skin had to be as white as candle wax, as church lime wash, as the cloth draped over a mummy. And to achieve that, you used Venetian ceruse, a thick white paste imported from Venetia name that sounded as romantic as a poem, but whose ingredients were lethal white lead and vinegar. You applied it each morning, one layer, then two, then three, until the real skin beneath vanished. No freckles, no wrinkles, no pores. Only a smooth, cold, expressionless surface like the porcelain mask of an actor in a tragedy you were forced to live each day. Strangely, you weren't afraid. You knew the powder made your skin swell red, that it thinned and cracked, that it bled in silence. But you continued because if you didn't look as pale as the queen, you would be forgotten. And being forgotten was the worst fate for a woman in this age. At court, if you were not seen, you did not exist. And if you did not exist, you were nothing. And lipstick red was mandatory. Not the fresh cherry red of modern times, it was the red of clotted blood, of the final flare before fading to black. Lip color was made from Cinnabura mercury, sulfate mixed with sheep fat or cold-pressed linseed oil. Applied to lips, to cheeks, beautiful to the point of haunting. And deadly in a beautiful way. You knew many ladies lost their teeth by 30. Their lips cracked open and refused to heal their breath, metallic, but still they painted, they smiled. They entered the ballroom as if death was part of the makeup ritual. Eyes were lined with ground charcoal black as night to create depth, sorrow, gratitude. Women were advised to look as though they just wept over a poem. To achieve this, they did not hesitate to drop rose water into their eyes or simply stay up late, cry a little for real. Then gently press the coal dust onto both lids. Hair. It had to be red. Like the queen. If it wasn't naturally red, you dyed it. With a strange mixture of alum, sulfur soapberry, and urine fermented for 3 days. The smell. No matter. Scented powder, rose oil, and a radiant smile would mask it. Not curly enough, wear a wig. And if you couldn't afford one, sell part of your own hair so someone else could be more beautiful than you. And you couldn't leave your eyebrows natural. They had to be plucked thin, nearly erased, to create the effect of an expressionless face. A face that revealed nothing was the mark of nobility. You didn't grin, you didn't frown. You simply looked. Eyes slightly open, lips gently closed, cheeks flushed as if kissed by the wind, and your whole face covered with a purposeful quiet. But the pinnacle of beauty lay in the strangest of details. You used crushed eggshells as setting powder. You used dried rabbit skin to rouge your cheeks, You perfumed yourself with mixtures of ambergris, musk, and lavender distilled in wine. Every step was a ritual. Every morning, a stage. And you, whoever you were, played the queen in your own play. Modern researchers now call the Elizabethan era the age of deadly cosmetics. But at the time, no one called it death. They called it dignity. Because if you were a woman, beauty was the last way to hold any kind of power in a world ruled by armored men making decisions for you. What few know is this: Elizabeth never forced women to imitate her. She wrote no law. But she appeared in every painting, every coin, every song. With a ghostly white face, high collar, layered silk gowns, and eyes that seemed to pierce through time. And from that, a standard was born, not decreed, but simply present enough to make everyone feel they were not enough. And you, when you looked in the mirror each morning, did not only see yourself. You saw a part of an era pressed against your skin, clinging to your lashes, whispering, "Just one more layer. You're not quite beautiful enough." Now imagine, while nobles used imported cosmetics from Venice, painting lead on their faces, holding mercury on their lips, just a few streets away in the villages. The markets or the poor districts of Elizabethan London, another beauty world existed. Less glamorous, but also less poisonous, and perhaps healthier. You are a working-class woman. No titles, no noble lineage, no crown. Only your face, your hands, and what nature has given you. But that doesn't mean you don't want to be beautiful. It just means you have to get creative with what you have. Natural cosmetics, the kitchen is your beauty counter. No Venetian ceruse, no mercury. But you have rice powder, crushed eggshells, dried rose petals, apple cider vinegar, and honey. You crush eggshells into a white face powder, mix vinegar with chamomile water as toner, blend rose petals with sheep fat for a night cream. And yes, you might not call it skincare, but in truth, you were a pioneer. Your cheeks are pink, not from mercury rouge, but because you just walked 4 kilometers home from the market. Your eyes are bright, not from finely lined coal, but because you sleep on time, eat your greens, and have never heard of serum. An interesting fact, many laboring women had healthier skin than noble women, even if tanned. They didn't plaster on lead, didn't use arsenic hair removers, weren't poisoned by cosmetics. And more importantly, they weren't haunted by mirrors, because many didn't own one. No mirrors, so they worried less about being ugly. This is a strange truth that modern sociologists find fascinating. When you don't see yourself every day, you have less desire to change it. Poor women of the time didn't gaze into a mirror every morning. They didn't know exactly how each detail of their face was aging, and that possibly let them live more peacefully. This was the perfect contrast to Elizabeth I, who spent 4 hours a day before the mirror reassembling her face. You, a woman living in the outskirts, spent those same 4 hours making soup, drying your hair, telling stories to your children, or sleeping. The result? You looked natural. You aged with time. And sometimes you even died 20 years later than the noble women at court. Hair, skin, and health beauty from within. No collagen supplements, but you drank herbal broths, applied fresh aloe to burns, and washed your hair with rainwater mixed with soapberry. You didn't curl your hair with iron rods, but braided it gently before sleep-waking to soft waves. You didn't pluck your eyebrows, didn't layer on thick powders, didn't wear wigs heavy enough to strain your neck. On festival days or market fairs, you used beet juice for blush, mixed wood ash with pig fat for eye color. Your scent didn't come from perfume, but from dried mint leaves tucked into your collar. Some women even baked apples and pressed the juice onto their skin, believing it would make the face as smooth as a ripe fruit. A record from 1593 notes, "Girls in the north use oatmeal and cold water each morning, and their cheeks glow like newly ripened peaches." Body odor and the unspoken truth. There was no deodorant, but poor women washed their clothes more often than nobles because they owned fewer garments. They didn't wear 6 layers of fabric like in court, didn't wear musty wigs. And they bathed with river water, rainwater, or steam from the hearth. In some rural regions, full-body bathing was a weekly habit, something royal women sometimes avoided for fear of weakening the heart. This is still debated among historians. Were noble women who smelled bad a myth? Some say it was slander from the lower class. But there is evidence that many noble ladies used perfumes to mask body odor because they didn't bathe enough. You, however, were different. You bathed, sunbathed, walked, breathed deeply, and you knew nothing of the burden of being beautiful by court standards. You simply lived and lived honestly. There is no portrait of you hanging in a museum, no poetry praising your lip color or skin tone. But you, the anonymous woman of Elizabeth's England, were a symbol of beauty that needed no witness. You didn't need mirrors. You didn't need standards. You didn't need one more layer. And perhaps because of that, you lived longer, healthier, and more truthfully.